Hi, meanwhile, can you tell me if you can hear me well? Can somebody give me a thumbs up or write on the chat if they can hear me? Hi, everyone. Hope everybody is doing fine. Um, in our continued lecture series, we'll talk about um, putting a product out in the market. Hi everyone. Hope all are doing good. So we are going to talk about releasing a product to market, and the reason why we feel this is important is because it kind of talks about the larger picture, right? When I say larger picture, think about the various roles in an organization. Think about the various job responsibilities of a role, and typically what happens is that you are doing a small part. Your contribution is a small contribution to a larger release that's happening, right? Be it a release of a product, be it one feature, be it a new idea. Your contribution is not as big as the release itself. But if you have the understanding of the larger picture, your work that you put in, it tends to be oriented towards that larger goal, and it gives you a good sense of what kind of dependencies are there that I should be aware of. Who are the other people in the team who are contributing to that release? um, and so on and so forth, right? So this is one of the key aspects in a product company to understand what it takes to release a product, both from a perspective of getting it out of the door and then getting it into the hands of the customers. And that's basically what we'll do today. So we'll learn various different concepts under this paradigm of releasing a product, and then various techniques that people use when they make decisions as they get closer to either finalizing the product that's getting released, or closer to the release date itself, right? So this is very um, these are the principles that can be applied to any industry. This is not limited to the software world. Can be in manufacturing, can be in agriculture, can be in construction. Each new enhancement of a product that goes out in the market can be termed as a release. It's not necessary that creating a new product and bringing it in the market is called a release, right? So with that background, right, let's first look at the main why, what, and who, right? So several considerations before we build a product. So why are we building the product that we are building? What is included and what is excluded in that product, meaning that you could have a product which is envisaged to cater to a certain group of customers, and it has 20 features in it. Can you build all 20 right away and release? Yes, probably you can, but it will take quite a bit of time. Let's say it takes 2 years to build out all those 20 features. Are you ready to wait for 2 years? Probably not. So then you start looking at what can I do in 3 months time, right? And that's what I mean by what is included, what is excluded. So thinking about what can I give in the hands of the customer that is usable for the customer, they get value out of it, and they are ready to pay me money for it, right? And then the last is who is involved in this job of releasing a product to the market, right? So what we are going to do is we are going to use a case study, right? And we are going to use maybe a couple of case studies, but this is one such case study of as you can see, it's a outdoor Bluetooth speaker and certain features listed there. It has a partnership listed there also, and a goal, right? So while we look at this case study, and I'll come to the other case study in a few minutes, but think of and put all your comments in the chat, right? What comes to your mind when you look at this product? Think from a perspective that you are the manager who is responsible for launching this product. What questions come to mind? What is missing in this slide? I definitely know there is something missing in this slide, right? Because I've created the slide, I know. I want everybody to give a deep thought to what do they find missing in this slide, and also what comes to their mind when they look at this product, right? So let's take maybe a few minutes, right? If you want to write down what you see in the picture, send it in chat, and then we'll move forward, right? Okay, for those who are joining in late, I'll just repeat the questions. What you see on the screen is a product, like our friend FF Warrior Gaming is saying that it's a speaker. Yes, it's written there on the top that it's outdoor Bluetooth speaker. What I want you guys to do is write to me all the questions that come to your mind when it comes to releasing. If you were the person who is releasing this product,
what questions come to your mind, right? And like I said, definitely there is something missing in this slide. I want you to tell me, what do you find missing in this slide? What data do you find missing?
So just so that I repeat the questions. What comes to your mind? And what do you find missing in this slide? Think of all of us as employees of this company who make this Bluetooth speaker, and we are all responsible for releasing this speaker in the market. What comes to your mind, right? Okay. All right, so let's, we have some questions here and some questions collected from other sessions also. So I'm going to summarize some of the questions that come to mind when we talk about this Bluetooth speaker to be released, right? So one of the questions is when, right? When is it going to be launched? Um, let's say, the product manager or whoever is the release manager says we have to launch it in 3 months time. All right. Then what is this smooth launch? What is the definition of smooth? Remember, when we talk about the corporate world and when we talk about the industry, metrics and measurement play a big role in a lot of decision making. So when somebody tells you, or us as a team, that hey, you know just make sure that it's a smooth launch, without telling us what smooth means, right? We know that, at least we know that, in 3 months time we have to bring this product to the market, meaning we have to launch this product. But nobody has told us what is a smooth launch, right? So we'll come to that. um, who are the customers, right? And how many of these customers are estimated to be net new customers? How many are upgrade customers? That's a great question, right? So how many customers are going to buy this for the first time, and how many are going to already have our product and are going to upgrade, right? What is the definition of all these features, right? What is waterproof? Can I say that, I'll drop the speaker, I'll from a boat in the ocean, and then pull it out the next day and it still should be working? Maybe that is one definition of the speaker being waterproof. Can I say that, waterproof speaker means that it should last for 8 hours in deep sea water? Or can I say that this speaker is a water resistant speaker, which is resistant to fresh water and goes to a maximum depth of 1.5 meters for 30 minutes, right? Now you are talking turkey, right? Now you're talking metric around what that waterproof means. And now you can correlate that, if you guys have heard about it, there is what is called as a IP68 international standard. Even your mobile phones, all these devices, they could be graded with that standard, which talks about its level of water resistance, right? So in our case, let's say, we know now that if our speaker goes down below in a fresh water is not salt water, up to a depth of 1.5 meters, you know roughly, let's say 500 feet, and can be there for 30 minutes and comes out and still keeps working, then we call it water resistant or waterproof, right? In reality, there is no such thing as waterproof really, but most of these, um, for a marketing perspective, people call it waterproof, but technically we know that it is water resistant, right? Then what does this clear sound mean, right? Anything that comes to your mind, what is clear sound? Because what I hear from, let's say, the headphones that I put and the music that I hear from my mobile phone, I can say that is clear sound. Somebody can say that, the very loud DJ playing, in the festivals around here in India, that is clear sound. So clear sound could be different for different people, right? which again points us to the same notion, the concept of putting a metric behind these subjective terms, right? We do not want any of this to be subjective. The metric for clear sound is defined by a ratio called signal to noise ratio. So anyone, I've actually worked in speaker industry for some time. So from there I learned that there is a ratio called SNR, and you can look it up on Google later on. This ratio basically talks about signal to noise, right? And without getting into a lot of details, for now, let us just assume that the signal to noise ratio is 80 decibels plus, which means that the amount of noise is much lower and the amount of signal is much higher, and that tells us that it is clear sound. So I think that's a fair definition, and we have a number now. 80 decibels plus should be the SNR ratio. And then there is another feature called long battery. Now, somebody might say, 6 hours is good enough for me. Some other person might say, no, no, I need at least 12 hours because once I charge in the morning, I do not get any opportunity to charge again. So I'll charge it only in the night. So 12 hours it should last. And remember, this is an outdoor speaker, right? So the longer battery, the better, because when you are next to a swimming pool like this, or you have taken this speaker on the beach, or in on some excursion, in a picnic or wherever, where you do not have a power supply, what do you do, right? You really need the long battery. So fine, our product manager has told us that 16 hours playtime is good enough, and that we can call as long battery, right? So we have now the exact definition of what is waterproof, what is long battery, and what is clear sound. Now this partnership around Melodia, you guys might be knowing that there are all these partnerships between big brand speaker companies and music apps, music platforms like Spotify and Amazon Music and so on. So in our case, this company is Melodia, and we have a music partnership. We want to know that yes, we will want to launch this partnership, but what is the dependency on that partner? The first question that comes to mind is, if you have to launch a speaker in 3 months, then what is the partner going to give us? What we are going to do? How are we going to integrate? What are the integration points? And what needs to be done to make sure that both sides are ready on the day of the launch, right? So we have to work backwards from that date, make sure that, because they are a different company, they are working on a different schedule. We need to make sure that our plan of launching our speaker is somehow inserted into their plan also, so that we have our APIs or whatever ready, right, on that day. So again, to make it more specific, what we really need is two integration points, let's say, right? So with the music app, what we will share is, let's say, sound controls. So from the music app, you are able to control the sound of the speaker. So turn off the volume, or if it has an equalizer or whatever, right? But it all happens through some API. So we need that API integration, and similarly, other information like, let's say, battery power or something like that. So let's say two integration points, which is basically two APIs should be ready on their side for us to integrate, right? So those are the two changes needed so that we can integrate with that company. So now we have this definition of what we really mean by a smooth launch, right? Any questions? Because I'll just repeat what I said earlier. And always remember this, that whenever you are presented with this kind of a slide, do not jump to solutioning, right? Ask a lot of questions. We have already learned that curiosity and asking intellectually curious questions, being inquisitive about each and every aspect, each and every word, in fact, that you see on the slide, which will help you define what this release is, right? What is our goal of smooth launch gets defined this way, right? And now we are comfortable that yes, now we have a definition. We cannot just say that, oh, I want to, um, I want a bike which is fast, right? Actually, fast has no meaning, right? Because one person's fast might not be the other person's fast, right? One person might think that 60 kilometers per hour is fast enough. The other person might think, no, that's too slow. We want 90 kilometers per hour. And that's exactly what we have done. So now we have defined, quantitatively defined our goal, that with these features and this one partnership, with these features, with the quantification and this one partnership, our smooth launch should happen in 3 months timeline to meet the above specifications, right? So now we can say that the smooth launch is that a launch where it meets all this specification and it happens without hiccup. Now there is a lot of activity that happens in the background if you have to do things without hiccups, remember, right? And we'll come to that in a moment, but I hope everybody got the understanding of how to turn loose subjective asks into very objective quantified statements so that they can start working towards that goal, right? All right, so we have a goal in front of us, the Bluetooth speaker. Just for kind of anybody who wants to do another case study later on or do it in a group later on and all that, here is another one. Now that you have an understanding of what it takes, right, for a basic spec, you can always ask more questions of everything that you see here. And I purposefully put this slide to give you the idea that these launches or these releases that we are talking about are not just software product releases. The principles, the concepts and the techniques that we are talking about today are applicable to this pots and pans company also. These are terracotta pots. They are termite resistant, unbreakable and smooth finish, right? So take this as a homework, later on. Ask yourself these questions around what it takes, what is unbreakable. Can I say that even if I drop it from the 20th floor, it should not break? It will need a it that can be made possible. There parts can be made such that even from that height, dropping it from the 20th floor will not break it, but it will cost that much extra. Do you want that? Or are you saying that if you drop it from, let's say, 3 feet, it won't break, right? That is my definition of unbreakable, right? So likewise, go through that motion and come up with a smooth launch for our terracotta pot company also, right? So um, this is another example. Now let's look at, given all these several terms, remember what we talked about was, um, who is doing this, right? We know that there are a lot of things to be done to put a product out there, but who exactly are the people doing it? What are they doing and why are they doing it, right? So let's study that. Okay, so knowing that there are several teams and several things to do, right? Let's break it down into two parts. And this is kind of, you could say, Satkam's approach of thinking it in a more elegant and a simpler way. How whenever you think about product releases, but there could be companies which take various different approaches. By and large, the teams that are involved in these, as well as the kind of work that they do, is pretty similar to what we are going to study, right? So again, think of all of us as working for this company, right? Our goal is this, right? Our goal is to put this speaker out with these specifications in 3 months time, right? So now who is involved? Let's first look at the inside out part of the planning, right? So there are two aspects. One is inside out, where we are talking about building the product and taking it to the door of the company, right? The main gate of the factory, you could say, right? That you have product ready, it's ready to be shipped, it's ready to be put on the truck, right? It is waiting to be put on the truck, it is packaged and everything is done and ready, right? There is one team which manages all of that until that product gets ready to that level, and then there is another team which takes that product, right, which you have you know brought to the gate of the company. It takes that product and distributes it or takes it to the customer, right? So reaching the customer uh, is the responsibility for another team which is outside in. So let's look at the inside out team first, right? And this approach focuses on internal planning and preparation. Remember that we have the asks for the definition, we need to act on those, and test and launch the product, right? So let's just think about inside out, right? And think about what all things come to your mind when you fast forward 3 months. You have, let's say, 1,000 boxes of those speakers packed and ready to be loaded on the trucks, right? Think about that and write in the comments what do you think each of these teams are doing, right? So there is a product management team working on the inside, there is an engineering team, there is a testing team, there is a deployment and launch team. What are these teams doing as they are preparing and planning to put the product out, right? What comes to your mind is what you should write. So take a few minutes and sending your questions. here. Okay, so let's look at one by one, right? Um, the product management team has defined what the product features are, right? They have defined, um, you know, who is going to use the product. So a persona is created. They have defined the specification for what is waterproof, the specification for what is longer battery life, and several other specifications that the product management team uses, right? So let's assume that they have defined it all, and they have written it down nicely in a specification, right? Next is the engineering team. So now for the engineering team, they have to build it, validate it, and then deploy it, right? So first is, let's say the data set preparation. So understanding all the data around the build of the product. So there is hardware, there is firmware, there is software. So three engineering teams. What does each one have to do? Let's say, let's just take the case of meeting the IP68 standard, which is that waterproof standard. When our speaker is dropped 1.5 meters in fresh water, it should still survive, right? Now, in order to achieve that, there has to be design changes on the hardware side, so that they have to make sure that they are using the right kind of material, so that it resists that water. They have to make sure that the water does not percolate and the speaker sustains for 30 minutes at least. They have to use the right kind of firmware and electronic systems inside the speaker, which do not rust and which do not go bad with with the being drowned in the water. And then there is the software team. Now let's go even deeper in one level on the software side. So let's say there are some Bluetooth. This speaker is a Bluetooth speaker, so some Bluetooth standards need to be used. So the software team looks at what kind of new standards are available in the market. Can we adopt one of those right now? What is the latest and greatest out there? What are the new inventions that have happened? What are the prototypes that we have tested? What is the last time the customer liked it, did not like? What is the customer review around the certain feature, and so on and so forth. So there is a lot of data that gets collected, because it is going to get used in designing as well as building this product, right? Now in that process, let's say we find out that our speaker is could last 1.5 meters in the water, but it needs certain plastic material which has to be imported from another country. And let's say there is some issue with that import, cannot happen in 3 months time, which basically means that the engineering team goes back to the product management team, asking them if in this particular release, we could have the outer cover made of certain plastic which is locally available, but which only lasts 1.2 meters instead of 1.5. And the product management team agrees, saying that fine, they do the cost benefit analysis around that 1.5 versus 1.2, and they settle on, okay, fine, we will change our specification to 1.2 because the material is not available, and we will convey the marketing and all other teams that don't sell our product as it will last underwater depth of 1.5 meters, sell it as it will last for 1.2 meters, right? So that's what is called as a trade-off that has happened between the engineering and the product management team to still meet the timeline, right? So then there is demos. So the engineering looks at, okay, what is the timeline for early demos? Do we want to take customer feedback by releasing some beta products in the market, and then understanding the customer feedback, whether they like it, don't like it, maybe around colors, right? If there are five different colors available in the speaker, and we are not very sure whether one shade of red or the other shade of yellow, what does the customer like more, we can actually build a prototype and take some customer surveys around it, right? So but it takes time to build it, and it has to go in our plan of building it also, right? So there are several things that happen on engineering. Then comes testing, right? So when it comes to testing, a speaker first of all has to be ready so that the test engineer can test it, and then can give feedback, right? But does it have to be really that? Maybe 100, not 100% ready. Can we have the speaker, certain features of the speaker ready so that they can start testing their um, those components, and then they will do a system wide testing, they'll do a full assembly testing after the speaker is all assembled together, right? So the test engineers prepare their own test plan, they write automation, they find out that all is fine, but the prototype cannot be delayed, otherwise everything falls in place. So they have already highlighted their side of the criticality, right? Then you know there is customer demos, there is documentation and help. So remember, the features documentation also is written from the product specifications, as well as the user guide, right? The user manual on what happens when you push a button, and how should you connect to the speaker to your power supply, and how should you use your speaker as a battery backup, and so on, right? So everything basically has to be documented, and it is the job of the engineering and test team to document that, so that further teams down the line can make use of it and use it further, right? So these are some of the takeaways on the release execution of inside out plan. Now that we have all this, let's look at what are some of the metric that an engineering team goes after, right? So this is basically or typically called a project management triangle. You will have a lot of material available on the internet also, but this is widely used techniques. Always you got to remember that for any project where you have a launch goal in place or a goal in place, there are three things that you need to consider, right? Time, scope, and budget, right? Anybody thinks of any other thing that I have missed out? Anything else that we need to consider, that we need to bring in? Okay, so I'll keep moving forward, but keep asking me questions in the chat, and I'm parallelly looking at the chat also. I'll answer to the best of my ability here, right? So think of the time, scope, budget as you know as impacting or dependent on each other. Okay, there can all three cannot be rigid. Okay, if you fix any change to one of the factors, will inevitably, if you increase scope, then either the time has to go up or the budget has to go up, right? So let's take an example, right? So if I increase the scope of the speaker, saying that um, my speaker in the first release was only black, right? I was going to release only black colored speakers in the first go, or I was going to let's say release um, the casing, for example, right? So I was not going to put, let's say, an aluminum bezel on my casing. I was going to I was supposed to only release the plastic bezel, but some marketing person told me, no, no, you know what, if you put the aluminum bezel, it has a nice jazz factor, so let's put in. That is what is increase of scope, right? Yesterday you told me that one color is fine, Yesterday you told me that one material is fine, but today you are telling me that no, I want the speaker in six colors, and I want it in aluminum as well as plastic. Right. That is increase of scope. With that, either the time or the budget has to change, it has to increase, right? There has to be a change on either one or both of the other two constraints, right? um, the time. Somebody tells me, let's say, decrease the time, right? I want this speaker released in 2 months. Fine, I'll release it in 2 months, but reduce the scope, or give me more budget, give me more money, so that I can hire more people, and still I can manage, 2.5 months instead of 3 months. Can you give me five more resources? When I say five more resources, it is money, right? For 3 months, five resources is 15 person months. And even if it is 1 lakh per person, we are talking about 15 lakh rupees extra budget just on the resources, right? So can you give me that extra budget so that I can reduce the timeline from 3 to 2.5? So, like we said, time is all about the schedule or the duration of the project. Scope is about the features, requirements, and the deliverables. What are you going to deliver? What is expected to be delivered? That is the scope. And budget is all about the resources and the cost that is required to complete the project, right? And as we saw, there are trade-offs. So to increase scope without changing time, you need increase in budget. To decrease the budget without changing scope, you must increase the time. So if I say that, no, you know what, earlier I had a budget of 5 lakh rupees, and 5 lakh is too less for this speaker, let's say 50 lakh rupees for the entire team, but I only can give you 30 lakh now. Fine, you know I'll do it in 30 lakh rupees with the same scope, but now I cannot do it in 3 months. Yeah, I will take 6 months to do it, right? And then there is a reduction of time, which you talked about already. So now looking at it in a little more detail, these three things, you know are things you should consider for any project, right? Be it your college projects, or be it a project that you're doing under your internship, or later on, in your careers once you join larger companies. Always think about time, scope, and budget. Okay. Now let's look at time particularly, right, in a little more detail, right? So navigating the time constraint in project management or managing this kind of a release means you are dealing with the schedule, overall schedule, right? So it is not only about the final date, right, final due date, but it is about planning, tracking, adapting, ensuring that the project stays on course. So it's like time tracking on a daily basis is what the time variable means, right? Now within time, you cannot have, like we discussed, right? The test team cannot suddenly wake up on the second last day and say, okay, give me all those speakers and I will test them, right? So what they do is they break it down into smaller milestones, and milestones are very core to time management, right? They are not simply tasks, but they are checkpoints, right? That a major that mark a major achievement, right? You have a milestone. Reaching a milestone means something has got built, something has got achieved by that day, or some part of the overall release has got completed by that day. And that is what milestone mean when it comes to the time variable. Next is the relative priority, right? So we kind of talked about it. So there are, from a relative prioritization perspective, milestones should be prioritized based on their importance, right, to to the overall release success, right? So high priority milestones, such as, you need a sign off from the government to certify that your speaker actually is IP68, which means that I need to be ready with that particular feature so that I can submit it to the government and get that endorsement from them at least a month before, right? I put it on higher priority, and so on and so forth. So everybody understands priority, we have talked about it in product management as well as problem breakdown. So I won't really repeat that, but that is the main focus of the schedule. The next is what is time bound and scope bound, right? Can anybody here, tell me what is the difference between time bound and scope bound? All right, so let's look at the definition, right? So time bound is what is tied to a specific date, that now a certain festival is coming up, and I want to release my product before that festival, or 15 days before that festival. So a particular date gets decided, and there is no compromise on that date, because your customer base is going to celebrate that festival on that day. And if you want them to become your customers, you have to release your product before that day, right? 15 days before that festival. That is a time bound project. And similarly, what is a scope bound project? Well, a scope bound project could be, I don't care whether it takes 3 months or 4 months or 5 months to do this, but I want to make sure that our speaker gets released in 6 colors. So the scope of release is not one color, it is 6 colors, and that is called a scope bound project, right? So understanding the distinction is crucial in setting the right kind of release schedule, right? Feasible schedule. Then there is dependencies milestone, right? So there are milestones often rely on one or the other event. You guys may have heard of critical path. You may have heard of one milestone being dependent on the other. So um, let's say you decide that I'm going to give my speakers for testing, right? To 30 beta customers. If I say that, it basically means that the beta milestone should be preceded by another milestone, which is internal beta testing complete, right? So your testing team has said that this speaker is ready to go out in the market, or ready to go out to those beta customers. I have tested them, right? So there is one milestone which is dependent on the other. Unless the internal team says that this product is ready to go out, that product cannot go to the customer, right? So that is a dependency or a dependent milestone, right? um, there are what is called as buffers to metrics. So whenever there is external dependency, the industry typically uh, puts what is called as buffers, right? Because there is unforeseen or changes which are beyond their control, right? Which may occur. So for example, if a truck shipment is going to come from southern part of a country to the northern part, and it is rainy season, that typically in the rainy season the trucks might get delayed by anywhere between 2 to 4 days, right? Shall I plan such that the truck arrives today, and um, the raw material starts getting used today? I cannot. I have to have used that 2 to 4 days buffer, right? So that's basically called buffer planning. So buffer is nothing but, everybody understands it's a reserve of time, right, which is added to the project schedule for unforeseen issues, especially unforeseen and issues which are out of your control, right, where you are dependent on something else, somebody else. And then there is last of all, which is one of, again, one thing which you will keep hearing from everybody at Satkam, is the metric, right? When we talk about metric, we are basically talking about data. We are talking about real numbers. Don't tell me that my bike is fast. Tell me that my bike's max speed is 80 kilometers an hour. Then I know what fast means. Don't tell me I want a smooth launch. Tell me that it has to happen in 3 months time with these features, and individually these features should meet these standards, right? So the best way to manage time also is to time track continuously. So metric tracking, time itself is a metric that we track, and the whole industry tracks actually very meticulously. And by tracking, metrics such as milestone completion, how many tasks remaining versus how many tasks completed, gives you a clear picture whether the project is on track or it is not, right? So it's a very data driven kind of approach, leaves nothing to chance, leaves nothing to somebody's imagination, and one can make informed decision that given the current trajectory we can see that our product may not be ready in 3 months time, or given the current trajectory we know that our product will be ready in 2.5 months time. Both metric are information that is present to you today, and because it is presented to you today, you can take an informed decision today, right? And that's the biggest beauty of this kind of a data driven approach, right? All right, so that was one aspect of the metric. Now let's move to the other aspect, right? So we talked about scope as the other metric. Now, in the world of scope, um, or rather, scope in the world of project management is kind of the defining factor of many things, right? Typically, people start with the scope, which is tell me what you want first, and then I'll tell you how much time it will take. Right? It's like going to a restaurant and ordering food, and you order the food first. So the restaurant owner asks you, what do you want to eat? You tell me, and then I will tell you how much time it will take and how much money it is going to cost. Right? So think of scope from that perspective, right? It defines the what, and the specific features, functions, deliverables that the final product must have. So, without having a clear definition of scope, a project is like a rudderless ship. It can take any direction. It just is drifting in the water, right? Similar to time, let's look at the key components of the scope also, right? So when it comes to scope, um, the coverage, requirement coverage, and prioritization. So um, let's take two requirements, right? So one requirement is um, 6 colors, right? So our product manager has decided that we want to release this product in 6 colors. One requirement. Second requirement is that our product should have 16 hours of battery life, right? So now between these two requirements, what is the priority? I should know first, right? Even if I'm going to do both the things at the same time, even if I know that or if I know that one thing precedes the other, whatever it is, I should know which of these two is higher goal, higher priority. So whenever it comes to trade-offs, whenever it comes to decision making of what can we drop, what can we include, this kind of prioritized list always helps us, right? It helps us identify and decide what is more critical, and this is where you separate what is a must have versus what is a nice to have, and establish like a clear rank, right? It's like rank 1 to 10. There cannot be two things which are rank number 1, right? Between those two also, what would you like to do first, and then you sort everything again, right? So that's what is done in the industry to clearly define the coverage as well as the prioritization. Next comes design. So once the requirements are done and prioritized, you move to the design phase. This is both the functional part of the design, and how the product will behave from a user perspective. So if you push this button, whether the speaker will light up. If you push this button, what will happen. Sometimes remember the Bluetooth speakers, they play kind of a startup and shutdown music, beeps, various beeps that happen, and so on, right? So all that is functional design. And then there is a technical design, right? So the underlying architecture, the technology stack, the hardware stack, the firmware stack, and so on, right? So that's all design aspects of the scope. And dependencies, we talked about dependency identification in scope also. So there are external factors, resources, and other projects that rely on you, right? On the scope that you're defining. So understanding those connections help you anticipate, the potential roadblocks, and you can plan accordingly, right? Then what happens is what is called as the feasible plan creation. So once you have the scope nailed, you have the priorities, you have the functional design, you have the technical design. Now you start thinking about, okay, now with these requirements, can I create a feasible plan? And this is where you map out the milestones, the timeline, and what is going to get delivered with what resources on what date at what quality level, right? Sometimes you can define that, my feature is not going to be complete by this date, but it is going to be complete enough that you can test a part of it, and so on, right? So that's well defined. And that all that plan of everybody working together till you hit that 3-month date is the feasible plan that the engineering would create. Inside the feasible plan there is test coverage also, right? So the scope defines, how many test cases need to be written, how many new test cases versus how many old are you going to run. You must define, what will be tested, how it will be tested, um, what do you call as a successful test, and so on, right? Can we say that, our speaker, if they hit 75 SNR, remember the SNR ratio for the clear sound? So we had defined a threshold of 80 and our speaker is hitting 75. The test engineer is not going to pass the test. They are going to say that, look, or even if somebody says that, yeah, yeah, but you know what, 75 is as good as 80, who cares, it's something which customers don't notice anyway, not, not something which our naked ear can comprehend. So why worry? That does not work. The test engineers are looking at the spec, right, of the product, the requirements of the product, and they test to requirements. And only when the product reaches or meets the requirements, they call it a successful test, right? So this ensures that your end product meets all the defined quality standards. Okay, so then the next is promote and production planning. So now you have a speaker built, now you want to make sure that you have to give it to manufacturing. The scope is included in the plan, the acceptance testing is done. You promote it, meaning you, what is in older days it used to be called RTM, okay, release to manufacturing, and typically used in many manufacturing companies, that you do your designs, you do your prototypes, you do all that in your labs. Once you're happy with what you have, you give it to manufacturing. They do kind of the first runs, and then they mass manufacture, right? And last of all, oh sorry, I missed support planning, right? So support planning, um, a good product or a great product needs great support, right? So the scoping involves determining what kind of support will be available to customers after it launches, right, including the documentation. We talked about that briefly earlier. The help files, the ongoing maintenance plan, and so on, right? So all of that also is a part of the scope, because what the engineering produces as the help files or the diagnostic tools are going to be further used by your customer success and your support, right? We'll come to that in a few minutes, but that is also included as a part of scope, right? And then there is metrics and tracking, right? So I won't repeat what is metric again, but metric tracking ensures you are gathering all the right data and you're tracking towards a successful goal, right? All right, then the third constraint is the budget part, right? And we talked about budget. So budget planning, it begins with a thorough assessment of all the costs together, right? So it includes what is the expense, what are the licenses used, what hardware, what machinery is going to be used, are there online servers, Are you going to have external licenses? What is the compensation or the salaries of the people, and so on and so forth, right? So budget also has dependencies. So if your project relies on another team, let's say the cost of an API subscription, right? um, that's a dependency that you need to highlight first, that either we buy that API or buy that subscription for that API, or we build it in house. What do you want to do? Do you want to spend this money or that money? Both are going to cost us. One is going to cost us less but more time. The other is going to cost us less time but more money. What do we do, right? So those are the decisions that are made from a budgetary perspective. And finally, a comprehensive budget is formed, right, is formulated or calculated. And this helps us stay on track also. You can't, after you're 50% in the project, you can't just say that, oh, you know what, you gave me a budget of 50 lakhs, but I have consumed all that 50 lakhs right now you give me another 20 lakh rupees, right, because I have to complete everything on time. Doesn't work that way. And that's why you need metric tracking. So you need a continuous feedback, looking at how you are doing from a budget perspective. Are you on track? Are you off track? If you're off track, is it positive? Are you saving money, or is it negative? Are you burning more money, right? And then what corrective actions do you need to take so that you keep it within budget? All right. So let's take a, a, a minute's pause here. Tell me, if you have any questions on all that you heard about the inside out part of the plan, right? Okay, so now that we know what is an inside out plan, we have a product which is manufactured, which is loaded on trucks, or at least a product which is brought to the gate of the company. Now we have to look at how do you take this product to your customers, right? And this becomes now even more complex and interesting, right? So this approach, basically the outside in approach, is all about thinking about who are the players outside. And these players are a part of the company. It is the same people maybe, but these roles are different, right? So we talked about it earlier: marketing, sales, success, and product management. There are other people also, there is distribution, and there is so many other people who help reach the customer. But largely, let us say that these are the four roles which take our product to the end customer, right? So what are the roles that these people are playing, right? What is the goal? The goal is basically to reach the right customer. Okay, so take a minute and send me your comments in chat on what kind of a plan and prep will you do for outside in. Remember, outside in is a plan to reach the end customer, and you are either a part of the marketing or the sales or the customer success or product management, and you have a speaker, right, ready at the gate of your factory. What will you do to reach that end customer? Send in your answers in chat. We'll review that for some time, and then we'll proceed. Okay, so here is
All right. So in the interest of time, we'll push forward.
a consolidation of all the answers that um, that we have received from students in various of these trainings. What is important, and this is no different than what really happens in the industry, right? So what is really important for all these teams is everything that you see in that cloud bubble in the center, right? So what are they worried about? They're worried about customer value, marketing strategy, sales pitch, training, um, TAM, SAM, SOM. We'll talk about it in a minute, right? But this is what, and the prep to make it happen is what is required, right? To be done. Now let's look at everything that these teams do, right? Typically, as they bring these products to their customers. Okay. So the first is you have a product ready, right? Which is a Bluetooth speaker. The At a very initial stage, even while the speaker is getting built, you kind of know what that speaker will be and what is the value proposition around that speaker, right? And there are ways to build this value proposition. It One of the ways, one of the techniques, and this is very interesting and important, and you can apply it to pretty much any product, right? If you have a product on mind today, ask these three questions and it will help you build a value prop for your product, right? So the first question is why buy this product, right? So it basically is what is the customer problem that we are trying to solve. And some of this we saw in the product management um, session also. So what is the underserved need of the customer? The you know why does the customer need this product? How is it solving for the customer's ask? The customer is wanting 16 hours battery life. The customer is wanting a waterproof speaker. The customer is wanting a clear sound and so on, right? So what problem is it solving, and what need is it fitting, right? It has to fit a need, and we have seen this enough in product market fit. So assume that that's happening, and this is important to establish. First is to understand why this customer will buy this product, right? Then the second one is why buy it now, right? Why should you solve that problem now? The customer might say, yeah, I want all this, but I don't want it today. So how are you going to tackle the timeline aspect, right? The customer may say that it feels that all his need is met, but he's going to buy this next year. Is that acceptable to you? You're no. So you should appeal to the customer's sense of time, right? On how it is going to benefit the customer if the customer decides to buy it earlier than later, right? And there are various products, you can think about that terracotta pot, or it could be a electronic EV bike, or it could be a lawnmower, it could be a pair of scissors, it could be this Bluetooth speaker, right? You can make this case for any product. So why buy it now? So first you have established why you need this product, why you should buy it now, and then the third and other important aspect is why buy it from me, right? Why buy it from our company? So now that the customer is ready to buy, you need to convince why you need to buy it from us, right? There are 15 companies out there who are selling Bluetooth speakers, but then what is so unique? What is differentiated from about our speaker from other companies that you should buy it from us, right? So this technique is used in creating value proposition. It is used in creating elevator pitches, advertisement, sales pitches, marketing slogans, you name it, right? Anything that a customer sees and gets attracted by and jumps to buy the product, you can build with these with this technique. Okay. Then the next is the tam, sam, and som. Sorry. Does anybody know what is tam? I'm pretty sure you must have come across this term, right? Tam. See, these terms are used usually, frequently used when talking about the customer. This is my TAM, that is my TAM. Can anyone of you explain in the chat window what is TAM? Yeah. All right. Let's look at these three terms in a little more detail, right? So TAM is nothing but total addressable market, right? So without any geo restriction, without any price constraint, without any distribution constraint, nothing, right? Our hypothesis is that the speaker needs a music source, right? So anybody with a smartphone is a potential buyer for a Bluetooth speaker. So we have a speaker, right, which we have manufactured, and we think that there are whatever X, what is the population of the world? I think 7 point whatever 5 billion, right? 7.8 billion people. Possibly each of them could buy the speaker, but at least, out of those 7.5, whatever billion people, 4.8 billion people have a smartphone in this world today, right? Which basically means our speaker can be connected to those 4.8 billion phones, which means that those 4.8 billion people could be our customers. That becomes my total addressable market from a world smartphone population perspective, right? And then within India, if I look at, we look at 700 million people, right? So 70 crore of Indians have smartphones out of the out of our population, which basically means that without a geo restriction, I have 4.8 billion as my TAM, as my target or addressable market. And with a geo restriction of India, that TAM reduces from 4.8 billion to 70 crores, right? Or 700 million. All right. So that is the definition of TAM. Now let's look at, now we know the big picture, right? That these are the number of people I can actually sell my phone to. Let's look at some other restrictions. Can everybody buy an outdoor clear sound, 16-hour battery speaker, Bluetooth speaker, which is 8,000 rupees? No, right? It's not affordable to many. And that's where now we start looking at, out of the 70 crores in India, who are these people who can buy that phone? So let's first look at the 34% of urban India, right? So 34% of people in India live in urban cities, right? Like Mumbai, Bangalore, Chennai, and Pune, and Delhi, and so on, right? And they're the larger, greater areas also around those big cities. That's where 34% of India's population lives. So we are going to target first only those 34%. And then we are going to target anybody who can afford 8,000 plus rupees phone, right? So, not phone, sorry, the speaker, right? Who has 8,000 rupees in their pocket to buy a speaker. It reduces that number even further. So 15% of that 34% suddenly brings it to 3.57. So let's say 3.5 crores is our serviceable addressable market. So where we do not have resources, I mean, we might say that, yeah, we can sell in the remotest part of India, we can sell on top of the Himalayas and whatnot, right? But do you have the wherewithal? It's going to take money to establish a showroom there, to send your speaker in a truck to that remote location. Are you going to do that right now? No, I'll do it in 2 years. Fine. Which basically means that you are now reducing your TAM to SOM, right? Which is a serviceable addressable market. So anyone with a smartphone is a potential buyer of a Bluetooth speaker, and anyone who lives in rural India, I'm going to take out anybody who lives who cannot afford 8,000 rupees. I'm going to take out, right? Now I have got 3.5 crore Indians who are possible targets for me. Now let's look at what is the obtainable market, right? So I find out through market research that the target base that I was talking about, already 48% has been penetrated by my competition, right? And out of that base, the 19% are kids under 18 years of age, 11% are elders which are 60 plus years of age, right? And 30% of those people who live in urban areas who can afford 8,000 rupees speaker are adults, right? 35 to 60 years of age, but they don't sit by the swimming pool listening to music. So if you now start thinking about who are these people who want a speaker to be carried outdoors, who are listening to that music, who live in urban areas, who the competition has not penetrated, who are not under 18 years of age, who are not above 35 years of age, you start boiling that down to a much smaller number, right? And let's say, we come to a number which is 1 crore of Indians where all of this applies, right? Out of which youth is, you know, 29 lakhs. Out of those 29 lakhs, does everybody love music? Probably not. Let's assume that, 10% or 8% of those don't like music, or even more. Let's say um, 15% don't like music. Okay, now that number comes to 22 lakhs, and now we say that okay, 22 lakhs target, but if those 22 lakhs are spread in 22 different cities in India, I don't have the money to pay the truck drivers to go to 22 cities. So where shall I start? Let me start with Mumbai. Okay, so then I find that Mumbai, which is a much smaller out of the overall urban population, I find that I can let me go to 1.1 lakh targets in Mumbai, and that becomes my serviceable obtainable market. So that's how the whole funnel is built to figure out where we are selling our speaker and why we are selling to those particular customers. Why now? Tomorrow I might go to Delhi. Day after tomorrow I might go to, you know to Chennai. When I say tomorrow, I mean, another 3 months Delhi, 6 months Chennai, 9 months Calcutta, and so on, right? So I can do that. Today I will start with Mumbai. That's my decision. Okay, so that's basically how the universe is. It is a top down market segmentation, as it is called, right? And we now know exactly who we are targeting, because as a marketing and as a sales person, I know now what kind of ad I have to build. Do I need to run that ad on, let's say, all radio channels in all cities? I don't. I just go to the radio channels in Mumbai because I've picked Mumbai as my first market, right? For the next 3 months, I just play my ads in Mumbai, and that's it, right? So that's how we make use of this funnel, the make use of this data, right? So we have now arrived at a customer cohort that we are going to go after. All right, similar to the inside out planning, there is a triangle constraint on certain certain metric that the outside in team also uses, right? So these are the core drivers for customer reach, right? And the model basically is talking about the relationship between the revenue margin and CSAT, right? And again, the same thing, right? You pull one in one direction, the other two, one of the other two or both have to change, right? Revenue, very easy, I would say, easy to understand. Revenue is basically total number of sales multiplied by the cost of the product multiplied by the discount will give you the overall revenue, right? And what is my revenue target for Mumbai? That's what I define, right? Next is um, revenue, by the way, is also called as top line, or the top line growth is another term for revenue, and it is basically the total income generated from sales, right? Margin is nothing but profit margin, right? And this is basically the margin that I'm going to earn from every sale that happens, right? So each time I sell a 8,000 rupee speaker, I put, let's say, 80 rupees in my pocket. Okay. So or whatever, right? I mean, let's pick a number, 500 rupees in my pocket for every 8,000 rupees sold, right? And that's my profit margin. So how efficiently, there are two ways to always control that margin, right? I can control the top line, I can keep increasing the sale so that my margin keeps going up, or I can decrease my cost, right, so that my margin goes up. So I have both the controls in my hand, and I can meaningfully use those to figure out how to meet my margin goals, right? And both ways are accepted in the industry. You can meet a margin goal that I have to make, let's say, 10% margin on my speaker, which is 800 rupees on 8,000, right? If I have to make 800 rupees on 8,000, I can make it by putting that extra cost on my speaker, by not putting that extra price tag on my speaker, but that is going to reduce my sale, or taking out cost from my bottom line, which is reduce the cost of transport, reduce the cost of, ad spends, and so on, right? Or resource cost. There are so many cost components that what one could look at and reduce if you have to control the margin. And the third is CSAT. So how satisfied is your customer, right, from a product and service perspective? And this CSAT is a key indicator of the long term success. Why is it so important? Because it tells me that if my customers like my product right now and they are giving me feedback, the likelihood of this product being successful in the future is very high, right? It is just always a risk game that we are playing. The risk that this product fails is low, right? And that's all that I need to ensure. I cannot guarantee that, this will be extremely successful, nor can I say that, it's going to be a failure. But I'm just basically reducing the risk of it getting failed, right? So the trade off, again, very simple. um, if you cannot raise the prices, right, you must focus on improving customer satisfaction. So if you, or rather, let's say you cannot change reduce the cost, I have to increase the price to meet my margin goal. My product has to be so good, which means the CSAT has to be so strong that customers are ready to buy the same product for even 9,000 rupees, right, instead of 8,000. Which means that I have to push my quality high so that my customers can pay a higher price, so that I don't have to reduce my cost, I can keep my margin goal, right? And that are now can be applied in all three corners of this triangle, right? So you boost CSAT, sacrifice margin, you increase margin to grow revenue. Yes, can happen, but then you have to achieve the economies of scale, right? You have to have such a volume of customers. Maybe my 1 lakh customers in Mumbai is not enough. If I have to do that, I have to go after maybe other cities, right? So this is the revenue component, right? Validating your entire strategy. Now the sources of revenue could be multiple, depending on, the music subscription on top of the, when you do the speaker sale, could be one kind of component. Speaker itself, the in-app purchases on the mobile phone could be other component, and so on, right? So there are multiple sources of revenue, and each, you have to build basically this kind of a model with all these micro transactions in place, and each model has different implications for sales and marketing. But you must have a clear picture of these revenue sources so that you can build a sustainable business strategy or a sustainable business model around this, and then it helps you in pricing and packaging of the product also, right? We talked about volume and market sizing, the SAM, TAM, SOM aspect of it. um, Launching a new productivity app, right? So your um, how, for example, if your market sizing indicates a small sum, your revenue expectation and your marketing budget should be adjusted accordingly also. And without this metric, you might allocate millions of rupees to a market which will only generate thousands in return, right? You have to, for a revenue, has a future growth aspect to be tracked, right? Not just market sizing, volume and source, but a future growth on what kind of trajectory can I showcase that this future is growing. Because see, the R&D costs are typically one time. The manufacturing and the recurring cost from the recurring margins from the product, they are going to put your sales in a high growth mode once you start selling that product in larger volumes, right? And of course, a good um, future growth target is a strong signal to develop more premium features. So if you get an indicator from the market that 16 hours battery life has increased the product sales by x%, you will try to double down on that one feature and see what else can you offer in that space, so that you can increase the sale even further, and so on, right? And then the type of metrics that are tracked are typically ARPU, ARPU, which is the average revenue per user, CLTV, which is the customer lifetime value, and there are so many, right? I mean, there are all these reach and conversion kind of metric that one could track around revenue. There could be a daily revenue, weekly, monthly, ARR, and so many other ways of tracking revenue, right? Again, metric tracking goes nowhere. It is here to stay on every slide probably. But by continuously monitoring, you can quickly identify the trends. You can make data driven decisions. You will have a clear focus whether you are meeting your revenue metric, and there is always an opportunity to improve it the next time, right? Now let's look at CSAT, customer satisfaction. um, so you know um, so a product release, like we said, is like launching a ship in uncharted, unknown territories, right? Unknown waters. So you while you plan every detail, and it all finally depends on how your ship is performing, right? And that is where customer satisfaction, or CSAT, comes into play, right? It becomes like a compass, it becomes like a guide point, um, which you cannot ignore, right? Or if you ignore CSAT, it's doomsday, right? So this is a very important metric to track um, from a from a release perspective. So if you think about all those things that need to get tracked when we are looking at CSAT, is, for example, the role of discounting, right? While discounting can be a very powerful tool for driving more and more sale, more and more adoption for your feature, its effect on CSAT is complex, right? A discount might attract new customers, but what happens after the promotion ends, right? So CSAT surveys can help you understand if your customer who receives a discount are satisfied with the product's value. And um, you will only know that they are satisfied when they start paying the full price for your product, right? A discounted price could mean that the customer bought it because you gave it at a discount, but that's okay. First time customer, you wanted to get that, have that customer shoed in, and then you could kind of sell other products repeatedly to the customer, right? um, what else? So typically what happens in the industry is that a baseline CSAT score is established for existing products or feature. And beyond that, that is basically a benchmark. And there is a survey, that, or a CSAT questions are outlined, that will get asked to the customers post release. All of that work happens before the release happens, and then immediately after release you start monitoring the CSAT, right? So these are the preps that happen while the release is happening and right after, and all the work that goes in preparing what we are going to track from a CSAT perspective, right? So essentially, by actively tracking CSAT metric, you are moving beyond your mere, intuition, and you start making a decision based on what the customer is actually telling you, right? And this can transform the product release process from a one time event to a continuous cycle of learning, right? You put a product out, you get customer feedback, you give that feedback to your product managers. The product managers look at, what is noise versus what is real data out of it, turn it into product specifications. The engineering manufactures a new product, ships it out, right? And kind of keeps going around in circles that way, right? And that is a way to ultimately, win a customer and keep a customer over a longer lifetime, right? Which is our goal. Last one, margin. um, so what should be our initial spending and product strategy? So even before the product even hits the market, you are already spending money on development, marketing, and everything in between, right? And these initial spends are your starting investments. Now, to ensure that you can like get return on these investments and make a profit, you need a solid pricing and packaging strategy, right? And this isn't just like a, some random number pulled out of thin air. There is a strategy behind how you want to price a product, how you want to trigger that sale also, right? um, if you set the price too low, you might struggle achieving a healthy margin. And if you set the price too high, you might lose the customer to competition. So how do you get the price right is also, as important. And then there is, several other cost aspects to that influence the margin, right? So there is day to day cost, there is discounting, which we talked about, and so on, right? So ultimately, tracking profit margin is key for planning of future growth. A healthy margin, provides capital to reinvest into the product. And whether you use that capital to build new features, you use that capital to do more marketing campaigns or expand in new markets. Remember, we went from Mumbai to Chennai to Calcutta, and now, all over India, and then maybe rest of the world, and so on. Where is that money coming from? It comes from tracking this margin well and reinvesting a part of this margin back into business, right? And without a clear understanding of your profitability, one is flying blind, right? One is unable to make any informed decisions whether you're doing the thing right or wrong, right? You might be building the best product in the world, but if you're not making money on the product, it's as good as a non product, right? So you have to make product with a certain product market fit, which achieves two things, right? What we have learned again from our product management lecture: one, does my product provide customer value? And second, does my product provide business value to me, right? Those are the two questions to be answered. Okay. All right, so we are getting towards the end of our conversation. There are four takeaways, right, from our topic today, which is: one, pay attention to target audience identification or the market sizing. Pay attention to what is your value proposition, what are you telling your customer, what is your story to your customer, how you are differentiated from the competition. Think about metrics around revenue, margin, CSAT, metric, and think about the pricing models. Think about customer satisfaction and customer service, right? So the last one actually is something which you talked about the least, But that is the another prep that happens when anybody talks about release planning. How many customer success agents, how many call center agents should I have on day one when I start putting this product out in the market? Because the if there is a problem with the product, if the customer wants to understand the product a little better, they start calling this number, and if there is nobody to pick up that number, nobody to solve their problems, it leaves them with a bad csat, right? So we don't want that experience, and for that reason we need to make sure our customer services staff is well trained, they have the right kind of knowledge bases available to them, and so on, right? So communications become very important. Generation of marketing material, SEO and online marketing, customer segmentation, um, what else? Yeah, I think I talked about metrics and measurement, which is, the key aspect, right? All right. So how does this all come together, right? So we we talked a whole lot about looking at a product, thinking about everything that goes from an inside out perspective and an outside in perspective, and what are must haves, what are good to haves, how do you do trade offs, how do you do or check dependencies, do all sorts of what if analysis. What if something goes bad, how am I going to roll it back? um, what if I run into a time crunch, what am I going, what three, what is my plan B, what other decisions do I have available, do I have the skill available to deliver this product? um, and always think about time, scope and budget in the inside out, and revenue margin csat in the outside in planning. Finally, think about who you are selling to, right? Think about who is your end customer and why should they buy the product from you, right? And this applies to any product. So this brings us to the end. There is some reference material here, if you guys want to refer to it. um, Thank you so much. We are all going to work in various different roles in the industry, but understanding the big picture always gives us clarity of our own contribution, and how our contribution is going to add up to reach our bigger goal, right? Thank you, and we'll talk let me know if you have questions again.